How many civilizations existed on Earth before us? For decades, this question has kept archaeologists and researchers of ancient texts in suspense. Although cuneiform tablets and global flood traditions describe ages of development reaching far beyond known history, official science often treats these testimonies as myth. But could these records and the traces on the seafloor be telling the truth? If so, what kind of worlds were they? Do echoes of their knowledge still remain in our culture? And finally, what caused their legacy to turn into the legend of the first beginning? We will discover this together in this episode. Welcome. To begin, we must turn to one of the most unsettling records ever found in ancient Mesopotamia, the Sumerian King List. At first, it looks like a simple list of rulers, city by city, king by king, a record of who held power and for how long. But then the numbers begin to break the normal scale of history. Before the flood, the text names kings whose reigns lasted not decades, but tens of thousands of years. The first king, Alulim, is said to have ruled for 28,800 years. The second, Alalngar, for 36,000 years. In total, 8 kings rule for 241,200 years. These are not the reigns of ordinary men. They sound like the reigns of ages. And then, after this impossible stretch of time, the scribe writes one simple line. Then the flood swept over. After the flood, the text continues. Kingship descends again. The reigns become shorter. Still strange, still exaggerated, but closer to the human world we recognize. The list splits history in two, a world before and a world after. So what are we looking at? Is this only mythology, or is it a scar in cultural memory? A record of a reset so profound that everything before it became legend. This raises a deeper question. What if the most shocking number is not how many civilizations we can name, but how many times the story had to begin again? This is the investigation we're beginning together. If you believe this is a question worth asking, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. And in the comments, let us know where in the world you are watching from. It helps to know who is on this search with us. The King List does not give us a simple answer. It gives us a broken record. It tells us that to count the worlds that came before, we first need to understand what kind of evidence can survive a flood, of water or of time itself. We need new rules for counting the uncountable. That line in the Sumerian text, the flood, acts as a rupture in memory, a deep wound in the historical record. It suggests that if we simply count the civilizations we can easily see, we might be counting only what grew in the ruins of something older. The question is not just how many worlds there were, but how many were erased. So, how do we begin an investigation like this? A simple countdown will not work. It would be like trying to map a coastline with a torn and water-damaged chart. Instead, we need a better method, a way of seeing not just what is present, but what is absent, and why. Our investigation will follow 3 distinct kinds of evidence, 3 layers of the human story that have survived in vastly different ways. First, we will follow the durable traces, the things made to last. These are the archives of clay, like the prism we just saw, and stone. They are the records that were intentionally created to carry memory forward. Lists of kings, records of harvests, laws, and sacred stories. This is the hardest, most visible layer of the past, the one upon which official history is built. But as that Sumerian list shows, even this hard evidence can contain deep and unsettling mysteries. Second, we must explore the erased landscapes. We have to confront the silence. History is shaped by what archaeologists can find, and they can only find what was lucky enough to survive. If the most hospitable places to live during the last ice age are now 100 meters underwater, then we are reading a history with entire chapters physically ripped out. This is not a conspiracy. It is a geological reality. We will have to look for the ghosts of these drowned worlds, following the shorelines that vanished beneath the sea, and third, we will seek out the defiant monuments. These are the structures that survived on land but seem to break the timeline. They appear too early, are built on too grand a scale, or show a level of organization that simply shouldn't exist yet according to the standard story. They are anomalies of stone and earth that challenge the simple idea that civilization began once, in one place, and marched forward in a straight line. These 3 paths, the durable archive, the erased world, and the defiant monument, will be our guide. This is how we can move beyond a simple list of names and into the deeper mystery of what it means to survive. To understand what's hidden, we must first have a firm grasp of what is visible. To see the cracks in the story, we have to know the story itself, so let us begin where the textbooks do, in the hot, dry plains of southern Mesopotamia, in the land of Sumer, at the accepted dawn of history. To begin our investigation, we must start on solid ground. The place where the first page of our shared written history is believed to have been turned. We travel to the flat, fertile plains of southern Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This is the landscape often called the cradle of civilization, and for a very specific reason. Here, some 6,000 years ago, the first true cities on Earth began to rise, places whose names echo from antiquity: Uruk, Ur, Eridu. These were not just large villages, they were complex systems of human organization, with temples, specialized labor, and centralized authority. And they possessed a technology that would change the nature of memory itself: writing. Using reeds to press wedge-shaped marks into tablets of wet clay, the Sumerians created a form of external memory. Cuneiform was more than a way to write poetry. It was an instrument of power. It recorded grain harvests, legal codes, trade deals, and the deeds of kings. For the first time, a society could create a detailed, administrative record of itself that could outlive any single human mind. This is why our conventional timeline of civilization so often begins here. The invention of writing acts as a powerful preservation filter. What is written down, especially on a medium as durable as baked clay, has a vastly higher chance of surviving the passage of millennia. It gives us a hard surface, a visible layer of evidence we can read and interpret. Oral traditions, social agreements, and entire worldviews from before this invention are far more difficult to recover. They exist, but as fainter traces, like echoes in a canyon rather than words on a page. The written record gives us a story with names, dates, and a sequence of events, and so this becomes our baseline. The world of Sumerian city-states is the first chapter in the book of history that we feel we can read with some degree of confidence. It's the official beginning, the point from which we draw the line forward to Babylon, to Egypt, to Greece, and eventually to ourselves. But this very clarity forces us to ask a difficult question. Is the first thing we can read the first important thing that ever happened? Does visibility equal origin? Is the beginning of the record truly the beginning of the story? To assume so is to assume that the long silence before the first scribe was an age of simplicity, that no great gatherings, no complex beliefs, no monumental efforts took place. This visible layer, this Sumerian beginning, is our essential starting point for the investigation. But we must see it for what it is: a surface, a foundation that may be built on top of something else. The most profound crack in this foundation, the first clue that the story is far deeper, doesn't come from our modern theories. It comes from the Sumerians themselves. It is written on the very clay tablets that create the baseline. The question then becomes, what happens when the first durable records tell a story that is far older and far stranger than the very cities that wrote them down? We return to that small block of baked clay, the prism that holds the Sumerian King List. We established it as part of the visible layer, the point where history seems to begin because memory was first fired into permanence. But when we look closer at what the scribes actually wrote, the foundation cracks. The text does not begin with the first king of the first city. It begins with an idea, a formula. It says, "After kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu." This isn't a simple political statement, it's a theory of civilization itself. For the Sumerians, order was not a human invention, painstakingly built from the ground up. It was a transfer. A complete system, with its laws, its hierarchies, its sacred duties, was lowered from a non-human domain into the world of mortals. This idea is the operating system of their world, the justification for the temple and the throne. The right to rule, to organize society, to build cities, was a gift from the sky, and the King List is the record of the mortals who were chosen to receive it. As we follow the cuneiform, the list unrolls through its first cities and rulers. We see the names of the antediluvian kings we glimpsed before, Alulim, Alalangar, and their reigns that defy biology, lasting tens of thousands of years each. The rhythm of the text feels mythic, cosmic, It's a chronicle of ages, not lifetimes. And then, abruptly, the rhythm breaks, the narrative shatters. A single, terse line serves as a wall in the centre of history. Quote 1. After that line, the story begins again. The text states, quote 2. And suddenly, the names and numbers change. The reigns, while still impressive, shrink from millennia to centuries, and then to decades. We begin to see figures who are anchored, however loosely, to the archaeological record. Rulers like Enmebarajesi of Kish, or the legendary Gilgamesh of Uruk, whose reign is listed as 126 years. The timeline shifts from the alien to the merely heroic. It is as if we have been reading two entirely different kinds of lists, stitched together by a catastrophe. This is the true shock of the artifact. The Sumerian King List is not just a roster of rulers, it is a memory of a reset. It is a story structured around a rupture so profound that it required the gods to lower civilization down to humanity all over again. The prism is a before and after photograph of the world, taken by its first scribes, and what this means for our investigation is profound. The official record from the dawn of recorded history explicitly states that it is not the dawn of history. The very civilization we use as our baseline, our ground zero, insists that it is a successor. It remembers a prior world, a different chapter of humanity that was violently erased. The first page of the book we can read tells us of a library that burned. The question, then, is no longer just about impossibly long lives. The question becomes, what was this event? What catastrophe was so complete that it could sever time in two, and leave a scar on the memory of a civilization for 1,000 years? The prism gives it a name, the flood. The line drawn in the clay of the King List, the flood that swept kingship away, is not an isolated reference. It is not one scribe's poetic flourish. It is the echo of a memory so profound it saturates the oldest literature on Earth. We find a second, even older witness in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In this story, the hero king seeks out a man named Utnapishtim, a survivor from a time before a great deluge. Utnapishtim tells of a divine warning, a massive boat he was commanded to build, and a storm that raged for 6 days and 7 nights until all of mankind had returned to clay. He and his family alone survived, landing on a mountain to witness the dawn of a new, washed clean world. The purpose of bringing this forward is not to prove one specific story or to simply map one ancient text onto another. It is to recognize a pattern. In the deepest layers of recorded memory, in one of the first civilizations to write its story down, we find this recurring trauma of a world-ending flood. It functions as a cultural scar, a memory of an event so devastating it became the fundamental division in time. There was a before and there is an after, and the two are separated by water. This changes the nature of our investigation. The most powerful question is not whether one specific boat saved 2 of every animal. The question is what kind of real-world event could feel like the entire world was ending? What kind of catastrophe could leave a wound so deep in a culture's memory that it permanently marks the beginning of time itself? The persistence of the story tells us something vital. For the people of ancient Mesopotamia, a world was lost. Their civilization was built on the memory of a reset. This brings us to a critical juncture. We have followed the first kind of trace, the durable memory, baked into clay tablets. But if a world was truly lost, if the landscape itself was broken, memory might not be the only thing that survived. Could we find physical proof of its erasure? The stories in clay and stone remember a great flood, a cultural scar left by a catastrophe that divided time into a before and an after. But must we leave this only in the realm of myth? Or is there a physical mechanism known and measured by science that is powerful enough to drown a world? The answer is written not in clay, but in the ice cores of Antarctica and Greenland, and in the drowned shorelines of every continent on Earth. As the last great ice age ended, the planet began to warm. The colossal ice sheets that covered much of North America and Eurasia, glaciers miles thick, began to melt. This wasn't a single cataclysmic event, but an inexorable transformation of the entire planet. Imagine it as a map being redrawn over centuries, the blue ink of the oceans bleeding inwards, claiming territory that had been dry land for millennia. The scale of this change is almost beyond comprehension. The total rise in global sea levels was not a few meters. the scientific consensus, based on decades of research, points to a rise of roughly 120 meters, nearly 400 feet, an invisible mountain of water added to every ocean on every coastline across the globe. Now consider where human life flourishes. Then, as now, we gather near the water, on the vast, fertile coastal plains, at the mouths of rivers, where the resources of the land and the sea converge. During the peak of the Ice Age, when much of the interior was harsh and frozen, these now vanished lowlands would have been the most temperate, resource-rich and desirable habitats on the planet, and this reveals a staggering possibility in our search for lost worlds. The places we search for the earliest signs of complex human society, the hills, the plateaus, the inland river valleys, may simply be the places that survived. We could be searching in the highlands, because the heartlands are gone. The most populated, most innovative centres of human life during that lost epoch might now be miles offshore, under hundreds of feet of water and layers of silt. This isn't speculation. It is the accepted geological reality of our world. It provides a powerful, non-mythical reason for why the archive of the deep human past feels so profoundly incomplete. The evidence wasn't just lost to the decay of time, it was actively, physically and systematically erased by the sea. This changes the entire investigation. But a theory of erasure, no matter how compelling, is not the same as proof. If entire landscapes, villages and settlements were truly swallowed by the rising tide, has anyone ever found one? Is there a single, undeniable trace of a human world resting on the dark of the seafloor? It is a staggering proposition that 120 meters of rising water redrew the map of the world, swallowing the most promising lands of the post-Ice Age Earth. It gives us a physical mechanism for a great forgetting. But for this investigation to stand on solid ground, a mechanism is not enough. We need a trace. We need proof. If the theory is correct, then somewhere beneath the waves, a piece of that lost world must be waiting. And it is. Off the Carmel coast of Israel, about 10 meters below the surface of the Mediterranean, lies a village. It is not a city of myth. It is a place called Atlit-Yam. Discovered by chance, it is one of the most significant and haunting underwater sites ever found. Marine archaeologists moving through the silent blue world have mapped its stone walls, its paved areas, its courtyards. They have found a stone-lined well still intact, built to draw fresh water thousands of years before it was lost to the sea. They have found megalithic stones arranged in a semicircle, with markings that suggest they were once used as a ritual space, a water shrine. They have even found human skeletons buried with care, lying undisturbed where their community laid them to rest nearly 9,000 years ago. This is the critical turn in our search. Atlit-Yam is not a palace of a lost king or a temple of gold. It is a fishing and farming village, a normal place, a home, and that is precisely what makes it so powerful. It proves, without any need for speculation, that ordinary human life, the foundation of any civilization, now lies on the seafloor. The drowned world is not a fantasy. It is an archaeological reality. The theory of lost coastal heartlands is no longer just a theory. The water that took the world's edges did not erase everything. The question is no longer if these settlements exist. The question is, how many more are out there, hidden beneath the waves, waiting for a chance discovery to rewrite another chapter of the human story? And this confirmation, this hard, tangible proof of a drowned village, gives us a new and perhaps more serious lens through which to view the most powerful drowned world story ever told. With a real, drowned village like Atlit-Yam anchored in the archaeological record, we can now turn to the name that haunts the entire subject of lost civilizations, Atlantis. The name itself carries an immense weight, a sense of profound loss, a forgotten grandeur of a world swallowed whole. For centuries it has fueled expeditions, inspired countless books, and captured the human imagination like no other story of a lost world. The source layer of this tradition is specific and known. It comes to us from the Athenian philosopher Plato in two of his dialogues from the 4th century BCE. He describes a mighty island empire, a naval power of immense sophistication located beyond the Pillars of Hercules. This civilization, he wrote, grew arrogant, and in a single terrible day and night of misfortune, it was swallowed by the sea and vanished. This is the textual bedrock of the legend. But here, our investigation must be precise. We are not treating Plato's account as a treasure map. To do so is to miss the deeper question. For our purposes, the most important question is not quote 5, but rather quote 6. Why does it feel so true, even after more than 2 millennia? The answer may lie in what we have just seen. The story of Atlantis describes a pattern. A thriving human world, located on the coast, is catastrophically lost to the water. This pattern is not just a fiction. As the Ice Age ended, the slow, relentless rise of the sea, 120 meters in total, was a reality for every human group living on every coastline on Earth. Over generations, homelands were lost, hunting grounds disappeared, sacred sites were submerged, the world changed, and the water was the agent of that change. What if the story of Atlantis endures not because it is a literal history of one specific empire, but because it is the perfect vessel for a memory of that real, widespread, an ancient trauma of losing the world to the sea. It may not be a map, but a shape for the memory of a world swallowed by the water. It gives a name and a narrative to one of humanity's oldest and deepest fears, that everything we build can be taken away. We have now followed one category of trace, the erased landscapes and the powerful memories they may have left behind. But there is another kind of evidence, just as challenging. These are the traces that were not erased. Defiant monuments that survived on dry land, yet are so old and so complex, they seem to break all the established rules of the past. The search for lost worlds is not always a search for what is buried under water. Sometimes a world is lost because it is buried under our own assumptions. On a dry hilltop in southeastern Turkey, a discovery was made that did not just add a new chapter to the story of civilization, it forced us to tear out the first pages and begin again. This defiant monument is called Göbekli Tepe. Its oldest layers date back around 11,500 years. This is not a guess. It is a date that pushes the story of monumental construction deep into the twilight of the last ice age. More than 6,000 years before the first stones were raised at Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the first pyramids in Egypt. Here, carved from the limestone bedrock of the plateau itself, stand enormous T-shaped pillars, some weighing over 10 tons. They are arranged in great circles, their surfaces covered in intricate carvings of scorpions, foxes, lions, and strange headless figures. This was not a small shrine. It was a massive coordinated construction project, undertaken over centuries, a cathedral on a hill before the idea of a cathedral should have been possible. Because here is the paradox that breaks the timeline. The standard story of human progress is a simple ladder. First, you get agriculture. Then, people settle down, villages grow into cities, and only then, with the surplus food, organised labour and ruling class of a city-state, do you get the power to build something on this scale. You need writing to organise it. You need pottery to store food for the workers. The people who built Göbekli Tepe had none of it. They were, by all archaeological evidence, hunter-gatherers. There is no sign of domesticated plants, no pottery, no writing, no metal tools. There are no houses here, no streets, no marketplace. It is not a city. It is something else entirely, something that shatters the ladder. It proves, with the undeniable weight of its own stone, that humanity's path was not so simple. It proves that a shared idea, a powerful belief, a sacred cosmology, could be enough to organise thousands of people across generations to quarry, move, and erect monuments that would stand for millennia. The drive to create shared meaning did not come after civilization. It may have been the engine that created it in the first place. This leaves us with a question far deeper than what lies beneath the waves. If not a king, or an emperor, or a city council, what was the invisible authority that commanded these stones to rise? What did these people believe so strongly that they reshaped the world to reflect it? The scale of Göbekli Tepe leaves us with a question that feels more fundamental than stone and time. Why was it built? What force, what idea, could persuade bands of hunter-gatherers to invest generations of labour into a project that offered no immediate material return? There are no houses here, no granaries, no city walls. Just this silent, symbolic gathering. The most compelling understanding is that this was not a city, but a cathedral, a sacred centre, a pilgrimage site built on a high, bare hill that could be seen from miles around. A place where different groups, scattered across the landscape, could meet to reaffirm their bonds, share knowledge, and participate in ceremonies that connected them to the cosmos. The carvings on the pillars, the snakes, the vultures, the scorpions, are not random decorations. They are likely characters in a complex mythology, a shared story written in stone that everyone who came here understood. Imagine the human effort, the journey across rugged terrain, the quarrying of multi-ton pillars with stone tools, the slow, careful process of carving these enigmatic figures. All of this energy was directed not at building a better shelter or storing more food, but at creating a place of shared meaning, a place set apart from the ordinary world. And this suggests a radical reordering of our story. The simple ladder of civilization says that agriculture created surplus, surplus allowed for cities, and cities created the luxury of high culture and religion. But Göbekli Tepe stands that ladder on its head. What if the shared story came first? What if the desire to build a house for the gods, a physical anchor for a people's view of the universe, was the very engine that drove social complexity? Perhaps civilization doesn't begin with a full stomach, but with a shared question about the stars. This changes what we're counting. It means that a civilization is not just a collection of technologies and institutions. At its core, it is a community organized around a shared map of meaning. It is a collective agreement on how the world works and what our place is within it. The city, when it finally arrives, may simply be the house built to protect that central sacred idea. This kind of deep understanding, this map of meaning, was not only written in stone. Across the world and thousands of years later, it was also written in the sky. A shared map of meaning can be carved into a mountain. It can gather thousands of people to move stone under an open sky, creating a durable, defiant trace. But complexity can also take a different form. It can be quieter, more patient, and infinitely more fragile. It can be written not in earth, but on the sky itself. To see this other kind of trace, we turn to the Maya, a civilization that treated time not just as a measurement, but as a sacred living entity. Of the thousands of books they created, only a handful survived the fires of conquest and the decay of the jungle. One of them is the Dresden Codex, a screenfold book made of bark paper. It is a delicate whisper from a world of profound intellectual order, and within its pages we find one of the most stunning achievements of ancient observation, the Venus table. For the Maya, Venus was not merely a bright point of light. It was a potent celestial being, a clock of immense importance. Over generations, their skywatchers recorded its precise movements. They knew that Venus completes its cycle, from morning star to disappearing to evening star and back again, in 584 days. The Dresden Codex doesn't just record this number, it contains a detailed almanac, a set of mathematical corrections that keeps the calendar accurate over hundreds of years. It predicts the planets' positions with a precision that is simply staggering. This was not achieved with telescopes or calculating machines. It was done with the naked eye, with mathematics, and with an almost unimaginable cultural patience. It required a society stable enough and dedicated enough to pass down observational records from one generation of scribes to the next, building a library of knowledge that spanned centuries. The ore here is not in some lost impossible technology. The ore is in the human mind, and in the power of a culture to commit itself to a single sacred intellectual pursuit for a duration that dwarfs our modern attention spans. This codex changes our search. Göbekli Tepe proves that social complexity can leave a massive, unmissable footprint. But the Dresden Codex proves that a civilization's deepest knowledge, its map of the cosmos, can be stored in a form so fragile it is nearly lost forever. It tells us that what we can count is not just what was built of stone, but what was lucky enough to survive the fire and the flood. So far, our investigation has taken us to the hills of Anatolia and the jungles of Mesoamerica. But does this kind of deep, complex past exist only in those parts of the world? Or is there another, equally profound story hidden in the deep ground of America? For our entire investigation so far, the ground beneath our feet has been in the Old World, the plains of Mesopotamia, the hills of Anatolia. The great weight of deep time seems to press down on that side of the ocean. It forces a question that feels almost local, almost personal for many of us. Does this kind of profound depth, this sense of a story far older than the one we were taught, exist only over there? Or is there a deep ground in the Americas too? The answer is not written in cuneiform. It is not a temple complex on a hill. It is something quieter, more fragile, and in its own way more shocking than any monument. The answer is a footprint. In the Tularosa Basin of New Mexico, within what is now White Sands National Park, there was once a vast lake, fed by meltwater from glaciers far to the north. And on the damp, soft shores of that Ice Age lake, people walked. We know they were there because the gypsum-rich mud captured their steps, hardening like plaster before being gently buried by millennia of shifting sediment. These are not abstract data points on a migration map. They are breathtakingly personal. You can see the long, purposeful strides of adults. You can see the smaller, sometimes chaotic tracks of children and teenagers. For a moment, the immense, sterile abstraction of deep time dissolves. You can almost feel the cool mud between your toes, see the pale sky over a world that no longer exists, and hear the sounds of a family moving through the landscape. And this is where the investigation turns. The awe of Göbekli Tepe comes from its impossible scale, the coordination of a society. The power of the White Sands footprints is the complete opposite. It is the power of the intimate. This is not the trace of a state or proof of a civilization. It is the undeniable physical proof of human life, of a single moment, preserved against all odds for 21,000 to 23,000 years. This one discovery fundamentally changes the story. It doesn't just push a date back on a chart. It rewrites the opening chapter of the human story on this continent. It confirms that people were living here, deep within North America, during the harshest period of the last ice age, thousands of years before the ice-free corridor was thought to have opened. They were not just arriving, they were already home. A footprint is proof of presence. It is a single, perfect moment captured by geological luck. But was it just a fleeting moment, a ghost on a landscape? Or is this single set of tracks just the first trace we've found of a much longer, more complex story written into the American earth? The White Sands discovery is not an isolated miracle. It is a single point of light in a deep and growing darkness. Once you know what to look for, you begin to see the pattern elsewhere. The traces are not always as clear as a footprint, but they are there, waiting in the earth. Travel 3,000 kilometers southeast, from the high desert of New Mexico to the sinkholes of Florida. Here, in the bed of the Orcilla River, is a different kind of window into the deep past, the Page-Ladson site. For years, it was just a deep pool in the river, but beneath the water and sediment, archaeologists found something that again pushed the timeline back. Stone tools, the bones of mastodons, extinct elephants, with butchering marks on them, and the context they were found in dates back at least 14,500 years. This is not a footprint, it is a trace of action, a record of survival from a time when the climate, the coastline, and the animal life of Florida would have been unrecognizable to us. The specific names of these places, White Sands, Page-Ladson and others, like the long-occupied Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania, are less important than the map they begin to draw. This is not a story confined to one corner of the continent, from the desert southwest to the submerged landscapes of the southeast. To the river valleys of the northeast, the evidence converges on a single powerful point. The human story in America is far older, more widespread, and more resilient than the one most of us were taught. The ground itself holds a much deeper memory than our books. The story does not begin a few hundred years ago with ships arriving from Europe. It does not even begin 13,000 years ago with the finely made spear points of the Clovis culture, which for so long was considered the absolute baseline for people in the Americas. The foundation is deeper. We have established a human presence stretching back into the chill of the last ice age. But presence is one thing. Organization is another. It is one thing to leave a footprint, or the remains of a single hunt. It is another thing entirely to move Earth, to shape the landscape into a form that carries meaning across millennia. Did these early peoples build things that could rival the monuments of the Old World? The answer is written in the soil of Louisiana, at a place that defies easy categorization. A human footprint in ancient mud is a trace of a single moment. It proves presence. But in the wetlands of what is now Louisiana, we find a different kind of trace altogether. Not a moment, but a monumental vision. Not a single person, but a society. The place is called Poverty Point. From the air it is breathtaking. a set of 6 enormous concentric semicircles of earth, like waves frozen in the soil. They are bisected by aisles, creating a vast amphitheatre facing a central plaza that spans over 37 acres. At one edge stands a colossal mound, an earthen bird in flight, rising more than 70 feet into the air. To build this, its indigenous creators had to move an estimated 1 million cubic meters of soil, basket by basket. It is one of the largest earthwork constructions of the ancient world. And here is the fact that changes the landscape of American history. This entire complex was planned and constructed between 3,700 and 3,100 years ago. It was built by a people who lived by hunting, fishing and gathering. They were not, according to the standard models, large-scale agriculturalists. They did not have a state bureaucracy, or draft animals, or wheeled carts. We have seen this paradox before, halfway across the world, on a dusty hilltop in Turkey. At Göbekli Tepe, a pre-agricultural society organised itself to quarry and erect massive stone pillars. Here, at Poverty Point, a pre-agricultural society organised itself to move mountains of earth, shaping the land into a sacred design on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. The logistics, the shared plan, the generational commitment, this level of social organisation was not supposed to exist without the foundation of farming and formal states. Yet here it is. Poverty Point is not a mystery belonging to a lost, unknown race. It is a testament to the complex, sophisticated, and deeply rooted indigenous civilizations of North America. It proves that thousands of years before the great cities of the Maya or the Aztec, a society here possessed the vision and the social technology to create a monumental center that may have drawn people from hundreds of miles away. The sheer scale is one form of genius. But further north, in the river valleys of Ohio, another culture would express its genius in a different language, not just scale, but a mastery of geometry and a dialogue with the sun and the moon. From the monumental scale of Poverty Point, our investigation into these traces of deep complexity leads us north, into the river valleys of what is now Ohio. Here, between 2,000 and 1,600 years ago, the indigenous peoples of the Hopewell tradition began to shape the very earth into a language of geometry and light. They built vast ceremonial landscapes, now recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. But these were not simply mounds or ridges. They were precise, enormous figures carved into the ground, a perfect circle over 1,000 feet in diameter connected to a perfect square, a massive octagon, its walls aligned with uncanny precision. These were not approximations. They were statements of order, monuments to an understanding of space and form that required planning, shared knowledge, and a stable, multi-generational vision. For years the question was why? Why these shapes? Why this scale? The answer, it turns out, was not just on the ground but in the sky. These earthworks were observatories. They were immense, silent instruments for tracking celestial time. The gateways and walls are aligned to the rising and setting points of the sun at the solstices and equinoxes, the anchor points of the solar year. But the Hopewell astronomers went further. They engineered these landscapes to track the far more complex cycles of the moon. This was not just about watching the full moon rise. They tracked the moon's long, slow, 18.6-year rhythm, the cycle of its northernmost and southernmost rising and setting points along the horizon. To capture this subtle cosmic dance requires meticulous, patient observation, passed down through generations. The Earth itself became a cosmological map, a clock built to measure the rhythms of the heavens. It was an archive of sacred knowledge, written not in clay, but in the land. This tradition reveals a worldview of profound intellectual and spiritual complexity, one that saw no division between geometry, ceremony, and the cosmos. These earthworks were vast ceremonial centres, gathering places for people across hundreds of miles. But did this kind of organisation, this shared map of meaning, ever coalesce into something we would recognise as a true city north of Mexico? The answer is yes. And near modern-day St. Louis, a city rose that was, for a time, larger than London. The earthworks of the Hopewell tradition reveal a people who mapped the cosmos onto their landscape, creating vast ceremonial centres that held their world together for centuries. But this was not the only form of monumentalism in ancient America, and it was not the largest. Across the Mississippi River, near modern-day St. Louis, Another culture, the Mississippian, took these traditions of mound building and social organization and scaled them up to a level that is difficult to comprehend. Here, they built a city, a true metropolis, which we now call Cahokia. At its heart stands a testament to human will and engineering that still dominates the horizon, Monk's Mound. Rising in 4 great terraces to a height of 30 meters, it is the largest pre-Columbian earthwork in the Americas. Its base is larger than that of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Every cubic meter of its earth, millions of baskets full, was moved by human hands. Upon its flat summit, the city's paramount leader would have lived and ruled, his home looking out over a domain that was, for a time, the most powerful center north of Mexico. But Monk's Mound was not an isolated monument. It was the center of a city that covered 6 square miles and included over 120 mounds. A grand plaza, leveled and engineered, stretched out before the Great Mound, used for public ceremonies, games, and markets. The city's core was eventually surrounded by a 2-mile-long defensive wall made of 15,000 oak logs. At its peak, around the year 1100 CE, Cahokia and its surrounding settlements may have had a population of 15,000 people or more, a city larger than London was at the time. For many of us, this fact is a quiet shock. The familiar story of North America often begins much, much later. The existence of a true city, a dense, planned, politically complex urban centre, born from indigenous innovation, forces a profound recalibration of our mental map of the past. This was not a simple village. It was a seat of power, a hub of trade, and a place of immense spiritual significance, built by the Mississippian people who engineered their world on a scale that would not be seen again on the continent for centuries. Cahokia stands as undeniable proof of a complex urban civilization that rose and fell in the heart of America long before its quote, _9__. It represents one model of how human complexity can be organized: dense, centralized, and monumental. But in the arid landscapes of the American Southwest, another culture was developing a different answer to the same question. Theirs was a civilization built not on the sheer mass of a single center, but on the strength of a web of connections reaching across the desert. Cahokia was a city of concentration, a dense world of plazas and pyramids built along a fertile river. But there is more than one way to organize a human world. Our investigation now moves from the river valley to the high, arid desert of northwestern New Mexico, to a place that redefines what a civilization can look like. This is Chaco Canyon. Between the mid-9th and early 13th centuries, the ancestral Puebloan peoples engineered a social and ceremonial landscape here that is unlike any other. At its heart are the great houses, vast multi-story stone structures, some with hundreds of rooms, meticulously planned and constructed. They are not simple villages that grew over time. They are monumental architecture, built to a clear and sophisticated plan. But the true scale of Chaco only becomes visible when you pull back. These great houses were not isolated. They were nodes in an enormous network. The true complexity here is not in any single building, but in the system that connected them. Radiating out from the canyon are hundreds of miles of engineered roads, some up to 30 feet wide. They are not simple, winding trails. They are straight causeways, cutting across the desert landscape, linking the central canyon to more than 150 other great houses across the region. This was a blueprint for a world written on the desert floor. This challenges our very definition of a city. What was this system for? Was Chaco Canyon a capital, its roads linking it to its provinces? Was it a pilgrimage center, the destination for people across the entire San Juan Basin? Was it a hub for trade, or a gathering place for seasonal ceremony? Archaeologists continue to explore these questions. But what is certain is that the Chaco phenomenon represents a form of widespread, coordinated, and deeply meaningful social organization, a civilization of connection. From the fleeting trace of a single footprint in Ice Age mud, to the massive earthworks of hunter-gatherers, to the sky clocks of the Hopewell tradition, to the great city of Cahokia, and now to the regional network of Chaco, the ancient American landscape reveals a story of profound and diverse indigenous achievement. The history here is not a footnote, it is a deep and complex world of its own. We have now seen that monumental, undertaught complexity is a fact, grounded in the American soil. With that understanding, we must turn our investigation towards sites that are famous for their controversy, places where real awe is often tangled with weak proof. Let us travel south to the high Andes of South America, to a site that has inspired some of the most extreme claims of all, Tiwanaku and the enduring enigma of Pumapunku. From the networked cities of North America, our investigation now turns south, to the high Altiplano of Bolivia, near the shores of Lake Titicaca. Here, within the vast ceremonial centre of Tiwanaku, lies a place that has become a legend in the search for lost worlds, Pumapunku. The site is a field of scattered monumental stones, but these are not rough megaliths. They are blocks of hard grey andesite and red sandstone, shaped with a precision that feels almost industrial. We see perfectly straight edges, ruler-flat surfaces, and complex interior corners cut to exacting angles. The most famous are the H-blocks, uniform, interlocking pieces that suggest a kind of modular construction. The sheer skill on display in some of the hardest stone on Earth is breathtaking. It is a genuine, undeniable marvel of engineering and artistry. This precision is so startling that it has fueled generations of speculation. It's here that theories of lost advanced technology, of laser-cutting tools and diamond-tipped machinery, find their most famous anchor. The argument is often made that no simple set of tools could produce such results, and therefore the builders must have possessed knowledge far beyond their time, or perhaps not of this world. But here, our investigation must draw a careful line. To look at this work and immediately credit it to an unknown external force is to risk missing the real wonder. The stones of Pumapunku are a testament not to a lost super technology, but to the profound and often underestimated genius of the Tiwanaku civilization. This was the spiritual and political heart of a vast Andean state that flourished for centuries. Their artisans possessed a multi-generational understanding of stone, using patient techniques of pounding, grinding, and polishing, with harder materials and abrasive slurries to achieve results that rival modern work. The mystery is not whether it was done by humans, but how these humans organized their society, their knowledge and their labour to create a sacred landscape of such perfection. The awe inspired by Pumapunku is real. It does not require weak proof to be powerful. In fact, it becomes more powerful when we see it for what it is, a monument to the heights of human discipline and vision in a challenging high-altitude environment. True respect for the past is found in appreciating the human achievement, not in inventing a shortcut that diminishes it. This is the difference between sustainable wonder and a brittle claim. It's a principle that strengthens our search for what is real, and it's a necessary tool as we approach other sites where claims of extreme antiquity and impossible engineering await. To build a case this large, we must not only look at the evidence, but decide how to weigh it. We've seen at Pumapunku how incredible real-world skill can sometimes be mistaken for impossible technology. But what happens when the very nature of a site is the subject of intense debate? Consider the megalithic site of Gunung Padang on the Indonesian island of Java. For years, it was understood as a series of ancient stone terraces built atop a hill. But in the last decade, a different and much more dramatic story emerged. One team of researchers proposed that the hill itself was not natural, that it was in fact a complex multi-layered pyramid, built by an advanced civilization over 20,000 years ago. The headlines were immediate and profound. If true, this single site would dismantle the entire established timeline of human history. It would predate Göbekli Tepe by 10 millennia. It would mean a sophisticated pyramid-building culture existed deep within the last ice age. However, this extraordinary claim has not been widely accepted by the broader scientific community. Many geologists and archaeologists who have studied the site see something different, a natural volcanic hill, whose summit was later terraced and used as a sacred place by people within the last few thousand years. They argue that the layers interpreted as man-made construction are the result of natural geological processes. The purpose of bringing this up is not to declare a final verdict from a distance. The debate on the ground continues. The purpose is to illustrate a core principle of our investigation. The burden of proof must always scale with the size of the claim. A discovery that would require us to tear up every textbook and rethink the entire human journey needs a foundation of evidence that is beyond dispute. It requires consensus, repeatability, and verification from many different angles. Until that bar is met, we must hold it with respect, but also with caution. By setting aside claims that remain on this contested frontier, we don't lose the mystery, we clarify it. We protect the investigation from its weakest points, and in doing so we focus our attention on the evidence that is truly powerful, strange, and paradigm-shifting. Some mysteries are a matter of geology and archaeology, a debate over whether a hill is a hill or a pyramid in disguise. But other mysteries are not fixed in stone at all. They are patterns, carried in memory, surviving in the oldest stories humanity tells about itself, again and again, across continents and millennia. We have learned to be careful with physical evidence, to distinguish between a footprint and a city, between real stonework and exaggerated claims. Now, we must apply that same care to one of the most persistent and powerful traces in the entire human story, the memory of a teacher who was not entirely human. Across continents and millennia, a single, extraordinary pattern repeats. It is the story of civilization beginning not as a slow crawl from the mud, but as a gift. Knowledge arrives suddenly, delivered by mysterious benefactors. In ancient Mesopotamia, the scribes who compiled the King List began with a simple, declarative statement that kingship descended from heaven. Before that, Sumerian traditions spoke of the Apkallu, 7 sages, sometimes described as half fish, half human, who emerged from the sea to give humanity the fundamentals of civilization: law, craft, and architecture. In other traditions, they are called the Anunnaki, the Watchers, or simply the gods. To be clear, our investigation is not attempting to prove the existence of ancient astronauts or divine beings. We are examining a recurring pattern in human thought. This is a belief-based reading of the past, another layer of evidence that sits alongside stone and clay. The question is not whether the Apkallu were physically real. The more profound question is why so many cultures, separated by vast distances and epochs, felt the need to invent this story. Perhaps the answer lies in the nature of memory itself. When foundational knowledge, how to plant crops, how to track the stars, how to build a society, is so ancient that its human origin point has been forgotten, a powerful narrative takes over. It could not have come from us, therefore it must have been given to us. It came from a time before, it came from above. The story of the ancient teacher is the story a civilization tells itself when it becomes a mystery to itself. It is the scar tissue that forms over the memory of a great transmission of knowledge, and like a scar, the motif is itself a kind of trace. It points to a profound sense of inheritance, a feeling that the world we know was built upon the foundations of something older, something greater, something now only dimly remembered. The loss of that original knowledge is the core tragedy in many of these stories. The teachers depart, the golden age ends, and humanity is left with only a fragmented, mythologized echo of what was once known. This forces us to confront a difficult question about our own time. If we want to understand how a world of advanced knowledge could decay into myth, we may only need to look in a mirror. Here is a question. Which object is more durable? A 4,000-year-old clay tablet, or the smartphone in your pocket? The immediate answer seems obvious, but the truth is more complicated and far more unsettling. We live in an age of information. More data is created every day than in all of prior human history. We have recorded our science, our art, our laws, and our lives with a precision and volume that would seem godlike to any previous era. We have built a global library of everything, but this library is built on glass and electricity. It is fantastically powerful, but it is also fantastically fragile. Consider the clay tablet like the one that carries the Sumerian King List. To read it, you need only 2 things: light and a knowledge of the language. The object itself is its own storage and its own interface. It is self-contained. It can survive fire. In fact, fire makes it harder. It can survive water. It can survive for millennia buried in the earth, and when it is uncovered, its message is still there, waiting. Now consider a modern hard drive or a server farm. To read the information it holds, you need the drive itself. You also need a compatible computer. That computer needs a specific operating system. That operating system needs software that can interpret the file system. And all of it, every single component, needs a constant, stable supply of electricity, generated by a power plant delivered through a grid. The entire chain, from the dam to the microchip, must be intact. If any single link in that vast, complex and invisible chain is broken, the hard drive is not a library. It is a brick. If our civilization were to experience a fundamental reset, a collapse of the global networks that support us, our descendants would face a strange paradox. They might find it easier to read the 4,000-year-old thoughts of a Sumerian scribe than to access the entire digital output of the 21st century. Our vast world of knowledge could vanish, not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of servers going silent. This is the fragility of our own moment. It teaches us a profound lesson about the past, that to be advanced is not the same thing as to be permanent. Complexity creates new kinds of vulnerability. This makes the idea of a lost, advanced civilization feel less like a myth and more like a pattern, a recurring possibility. This pattern of complex systems unraveling is not just a thought experiment. To understand how a great reset can happen, we don't need to imagine a global cataclysm from the start. History gives us smaller, well-documented examples of how the light of a civilization can dim. The idea of a civilization vanishing, a world reset to zero, is not just a feature of myth. It is a documented process. It has happened in the full light of history. We have watched the replay. Around 1200 BCE, the Eastern Mediterranean was a vibrant, interconnected world. Great powers, the Hittites in Anatolia, the Mycenaeans in Greece, the New Kingdom of Egypt, were linked by sophisticated trade routes. They exchanged tin, copper, grain, ideas, and royal correspondence written on clay tablets. It was a globalized system, an ancient world order, and then, in the space of a few decades, it shattered. This event is known as the Late Bronze Age collapse. It wasn't a single war or a simple invasion, it was a systems failure. A convergence of drought, famine, internal rebellions and disruptions to trade created a cascade of failure that brought down entire empires. Great cities were abandoned, royal palaces were burned, and in many places a fundamental piece of civilizational software was lost: the ability to write. Literacy vanished from Greece for centuries, plunging it into a dark age. The world became smaller, more isolated, poorer. The memory of the old, grand world survived only in fragments, in epics like the Iliad that spoke of a lost age of heroes. This historical event provides a powerful model. It shows us that complexity is not a one-way street. It is fragile. A network can break, and when it does, knowledge can be lost, and continuity can be severed. And this raises the critical question for our investigation. If a sophisticated, literate, interconnected world could fracture so completely just over 3,000 years ago, a time from which we have at least some records, what could have been lost in the deeper past? What kind of resets could have happened 5,000, 10,000 or 15,000 years earlier, where the traces were already faint? Collapse, then, is not an exotic, mythical event reserved for a singular flood. It is a recurring pattern in the human story. And accepting this possibility makes the fragments we've been examining, the impossible numbers in Sumerian clay, the drowned coastlines, the monuments that seem out of time, feel far more plausible as echoes of worlds that rose and fell long before the one we know. So now, with all these pieces on the table, we can finally answer the question: how many civilizations has Earth had? The answer isn't a simple number. It's a ladder of evidence, and it's time we climbed it, starting from the ground we stand on most securely. The initial question was simple: how many? A number. But the evidence we have followed does not lead to a simple count. It leads to something stronger, a framework for understanding what can be known. The answer is not a number. It is a ladder of certainty, and it's time to build it, rung by rung. The first rung is the ground we stand on. It is the layer of confirmed civilizations. This is Sumer, this is dynastic Egypt, this is the Indus Valley. These are the societies that left behind the clearest traces, city grids, royal tombs, and above all, written records. This is the history that is most visible, the solid baseline from which all investigation must begin. We can count these with confidence because they left us the tools to do so. The second rung, just above it, is the layer of known collapses. This is the evidence that the first rung is not permanent. The Late Bronze Age collapse showed us how an interconnected world of palaces, trade routes, and literacy can catastrophically fail. This rung proves the principle of reset. It is the hard, historical evidence that complex human systems can break, that knowledge can be lost, and that dark ages are not myths. but documented realities, this rung reminds us that history is not a smooth ascent. It is a landscape of ruins. The third rung takes us much deeper. This is the layer of deep time traces. This is not a city, it is a footprint. The tracks left in the wet ground of white sands 23,000 years ago do not speak of kings or empires. They speak of presence. This rung shatters the conventional timeline. It establishes that the human story is vastly older than the first cities, that for millennia people walked landscapes we can barely imagine. It is the proof of an immense human preface to the Book of Civilization. The fourth rung complicates the story further. It is the layer of defiant monuments. This is Göbekli Tepe rising from a Turkish hilltop 11,500 years ago. This is Poverty Point, its earthen ridges shaped by hunter-fisher-gatherers in Louisiana. These sites defy the simple ladder model. They are evidence of massive, organised, symbolic labour before the machinery of the state and the city as we know them. This rung proves that a shared map of meaning can be a force powerful enough to reshape the earth long before the first king's decree was ever written down. And the fifth rung is the one that introduces the great unknown. This is the layer of erased landscapes. This is the 120 metres of sea level rise. This is the drowned village of Atlit-Yam. This rung is not about a specific culture, but about a vast missing archive. It represents the millions of square kilometres of coastal plains, the most likely heartlands for ancient peoples, that were swallowed by the sea. It is the physical proof that a huge portion of the human world is now physically beyond our easy reach. These first 5 rungs are built on a foundation of tangible evidence, on clay, on geology, on human bone, and on stone. And even if we stopped here, the picture of our past would be profoundly deeper, older, and more fragmented than the one we were taught. But the ladder does not end here. It rises into a different kind of evidence, the evidence of what the human mind refuses to forget. We now move from the traces left in the earth to the traces left in memory. We have built our ladder of evidence from the ground up. We began with the hardest, most tangible proof, cities and collapses confirmed in clay and stone. We moved to the deep time of human presence, marked by footprints in ancient mud. We saw how organised societies could write their intentions into the earth itself, long before they fit our simple models. We followed the evidence down into the drowned world of the vanished coastlines, a physical reason for a missing past. Now, we climb to the top of the ladder to the final rungs. These are not made of physical material. They are made of something far more elusive yet impossibly durable, memory. The sixth rung is for the powerful memory traditions. These are the patterns that echo across cultures separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles. The story of a great flood that washes the world clean. The legend of a magnificent civilization swallowed by the sea. The account of a golden age followed by a catastrophic fall. When we looked at Plato's Atlantis, we treated it not as a treasure map, but as a perfect example of this rung. These stories are not in themselves archaeological proof, but their persistence is a form of data. They are the cultural scars left behind by immense trauma. They are the shape of what it feels like to lose a world preserved not in stone, but in story. An echo is not the original sound, but it proves a sound was made. Above this, we reach the seventh and final rung, belief-based readings. This is where we place the most resonant and mysterious human explanations for our own existence. Here lives the recurring motif of the ancient teacher, the Apkala emerging from the waters to give civilization to the Sumerians, the Watchers descending from the heavens, the idea that knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, law, architecture did not evolve slowly, but arrived as a complete gift from a non-human source or from a prior forgotten cycle of humanity. These top rungs are different. They are not about physical certainty. To demand a pot shard or a radiocarbon date from a myth is to misunderstand its function. These stories are evidence of something else entirely. They are the record of humanity's attempt to answer the most fundamental questions. Where did we come from? How did we learn what we know? And what came before us? To ignore these echoes, to dismiss these beliefs as mere fantasy, is to tear out the final pages of the human archive. It is to assume that the only things that matter are the things we can hold. But these traditions are also traces. They are evidence of what we have struggled to remember and what we fear we have forgotten. The very existence of these persistent, powerful stories is a mystery that is just as profound as any buried city. With this, our ladder is complete. It gives us a framework for holding all these different ways of knowing at the same time. We don't have to choose between the footprint in the mud and the story of a god in the sky. We can see them both as different kinds of traces, left by the same long, complex, and often broken human journey. So, with this tool in hand, we can finally face the title of our investigation. What is the final count? What does this ladder truly tell us about the number of worlds that came before our own? And so, we return to the question that began our entire investigation. After following the traces through clay, water, earth, and memory, after climbing the ladder of evidence from the solid ground of archaeology to the haunting mists of myth, how many civilizations has Earth had? The question itself contains a hidden assumption. It assumes history is a single, complete book, sitting on a shelf waiting for us to read it, that our task is simply to turn the pages and count the chapters. But every piece of evidence we have examined suggests something far more complex and far more profound. History is not one book. It is a library containing the stories of every human world that has ever been. And the shocking truth is, most of that library has burned to the ground. We are not readers of a finished story. We are archaeologists of ash, sifting through the ruins, finding a scorched page of a law code here, a fragment of a star chart there, a single, perfect footprint preserved in what was once the mud of a now vanished shore. We are trying to reconstruct the shape of epics from the few words that survived the fire. This is why a simple number, an easy count of 12 or 20 or 100, will always be a deception. The true count is not a number you can write down. It is the realization that civilization is not a ladder that humanity climbs only once, moving in a straight, unbroken line from stone tools to satellites. The evidence, from the Sumerian record of Reset to the monumentalism that appears before the state, points to a different pattern entirely. A cycle, a great and powerful rhythm of rising and falling, of building and erasure, of knowledge gained and knowledge catastrophically lost, only to be painstakingly rediscovered by descendants who may not even know they are walking in the footsteps of their ancestors. This understanding leads to the most unsettling and transformative revelation of all. We are not the guaranteed summit of 60,000 years of human progress. We are not the final, triumphant chapter of the one and only book. We are one iteration, one attempt, one version of a complex world, built upon the literal and cultural rubble of those that came before. Our languages contain ghost words from forgotten tongues. Our myths contain the faint, distorted echoes of geological traumas and lost wisdom. The ghosts in the archive, the antediluvian kings, the teachers from the sea, the memory of the flood, are not merely curiosities. They are the scars, the echoes of previous cycles, faint warnings from a human story that is far deeper, far older, and perhaps far more repetitive than our conventional maps of time have ever allowed. The final answer, then, is this shift in perspective, to stop counting a list and to start seeing the pattern. The secret hidden in the King List, the meaning of the drowned coasts, the purpose of the earthworks aligned to the moon. It is the cycle itself, the rise, the fall, and the reset. That is the secret. That is the true count. To feel the weight of this, we must go back one last time. Let us return to the traces we've uncovered, the clay, the drowned stone, the footprints. But this time, we will see them not just as clues to solve a mystery, but as the different forms of memory our planet holds, the stubborn, enduring thoughts of worlds that refuse to be completely forgotten. The investigation reaches a quiet center. The question is no longer about a number, but about the nature of memory itself. The past does not speak in a single voice. It reaches us through traces, each with its own character, its own story of survival. Think back to the clay prism. It is a hard memory. Deliberately fired, inscribed with purpose, it was designed to endure. It is an archive, a message sent forward in time with the hope of being read. Its survival is an act of intention. Then we stood at the edge of a memory made of water. The drowned shoreline is a wet memory, a history told by what is no longer there. It is a hollow space, a deep and silent archive of absence. We cannot read its pages directly, but we can feel the weight of the lost world it conceals. its survival is a haunting. We walked across memories made of Earth. The great mounds and geometric earthworks of America are a soft memory. They are not objects placed upon the landscape. They are woven into its very shape. The memory is the land itself, rising and falling in a rhythm that speaks of calendars, ceremonies, and communities. It survives by becoming part of the living world. And finally, the most vulnerable trace of all, the footprint in the ancient mud of white sands. This is a fleeting memory. It was never meant to be a record. It is a simple moment of life, a footstep on a wet shore, captured by pure chance, hardened by time. It survives not by design, but by accident. Hard, wet, soft, fleeting. These are the forms that survival takes. This is the language of deep time. It is a story told in baked clay and empty ocean, in shaped earth and a chance impression. Our investigation reveals that the past is not a library of complete books, but a collection of these fragments, a testament not simply to what existed, but to what has managed, against all odds, to remain. And seeing these ancient, durable forms of memory forces us to ask a difficult question about our own. This journey through the past returns us inevitably to the present. We stand in an age of unprecedented information. We possess more knowledge, more data, more history than all preceding generations combined. But we must ask a difficult question. How have we chosen to remember it all? They wrote their memories in stone and baked them in clay. They carved their worlds into the living rock of the earth and aligned monuments with the patient, turning stars. Their methods were laborious. Their capacity for storage was tiny compared to ours. But their records had a kind of brutal permanence. We write our memories on glass and light, in a language of electrical pulses that requires a constant, uninterrupted flow of energy to even exist. Our knowledge lives in humming server farms, cooled by rivers of water, connected by threads of fibre optic cable. Our libraries are vaster than any that have ever existed, holding the heritage of a world. Yet they could be rendered silent and unreadable by a single sustained collapse of the power grid that sustains them. A hard drive, without the precise machinery and stable electricity needed to read it, is just a silent, useless stone. There is a profound irony in this. In our technological sophistication, in our ability to store everything, we may have created the most fragile memory system in human history. A single fire could destroy a clay library, but the surviving tablets would still speak. What happens when the power goes out everywhere, and for good? The library of our age would not burn, it would simply vanish, leaving behind inscrutable artifacts that hold everything and say nothing. The ancient past, then, is not just a story about them. It is a quiet warning for us. It is a mirror, held up across millennia, that shows us our own reflection. And that reflection is more ephemeral, more dependent on a delicate system of interconnected power than we care to admit. This leads to a final, humbling thought. What will the archaeologists of the future sifting through the layers of our time find of us? Imagine, for a moment, an archaeologist in a time so distant it is unrecognizable. They are not digging for Sumerian clay or Maya glyphs. They are sifting through a thin, strange layer in the rock, our layer, the Anthropocene. What will they find of us? Not our digital libraries, their servers long since turned to dust. Not our songs, our films, or the intricate philosophers debated in languages no one living can speak. They will find what was durable. They will find the foundations of our cities, vast grids of concrete and steel rebar. They will find strange synthetic polymers, our plastics, that refuse to decay. Their molecular chains a puzzle of an extinct chemistry. They will find spikes of radioactive isotopes in the soil, the faint, lingering signature of our power and our peril. From these fragments, what story will they tell? Will they see the complexity, the love, the art, the terror, the hope that defined our age? Or will they simply record the evidence of a species that briefly, and with great energy, rearranged the surface of its world? Will they conclude that we were a short-lived geological event, a fever that burned brightly and then was gone? Throughout this journey we have stood before the T-shaped pillars of Göbekli Tepe, before the earthworks of the Hopewell, and we have guessed at their meaning. We have tried to read the minds of people separated from us by an ocean of time. The future archaeologists standing in the ruins of a skyscraper will do the same for us. They will guess at our rituals, our beliefs, our cosmology. We will become their myth. We will be their lost world. And in that moment, a profound connection forms across the ages. The act of looking back, of trying to understand a vanished world from its surviving traces, is a fundamentally human act of imagination and empathy. We feel a kinship with the builders of Cahokia, not just because of what they built, but because we too will one day be a mystery to be solved. Our investigation, which began with a question of counting, ends here. It ends with the humbling recognition that every civilization in the end becomes an act of memory. After this long journey through time, through the archives of clay and stone, across drowned shorelines and landscapes of earth, we arrive at the end of the question. There are things that can be counted. We can count the kings of Uruk, whose names and reigns were pressed into damp clay by scribes who believed their civilization was a gift from heaven. We can measure the foundations of the great houses at Chaco, feeling the hard certainty of stone walls aligned to the sun and moon. We can trace the layers of occupation at Meadowcroft, a continuous human story told in shades of ancient soil. These are the hard surfaces of history, the tangible, the measurable, the known. They provide an anchor, a sense of solid ground beneath our feet. We can hold them, date them, and place them on a timeline. They are the undeniable evidence that great and complex worlds have risen on this earth. But these are only the pages that did not burn. We cannot count the worlds lost beneath the waves. We can only stand at the edge of the water and imagine the coastal plains, now under 100 meters of sea, where entire cultures may have lived and died, their memory scoured away by the currents. We cannot count the memories that dissolved into myth, the real environmental traumas and societal collapses that became stories of divine anger, of sunken lands, and of warnings passed down through generations until the original event was lost in the telling. They survive not as data, but as scars on the human imagination. And most profoundly, we cannot count the civilizations that left no trace at all, worlds built of wood and fibre whose knowledge was held in memory, not on stone, and whose disappearance was so complete that not even a ghost of a story remains. To count only what is visible is to mistake the few surviving trees for the entire forest. The goal of this investigation, then, was never to arrive at a definitive number. The search for a simple count, a list of 12, or 20, or 100, was a doorway, not a destination. The real purpose was to learn how to see the echoes, to learn how to listen to the silence between the records, to understand that a footprint in ancient mud, a strange number on a clay prism, or a geometric earthwork aligned to the moon are not just data points. They are signals from a past so deep that its full shape is lost to us forever. They are proof of absence, proof that the book of history is missing most of its pages. And in that recognition, we find the only honest answer to our question. It is not a number, it is a form of respect, a deep and quiet reverence for what has survived the crushing pressures of time, reverence for the tenacity of memory that allows a flood story to outlive the society that first told it, reverence for the builders, the skywatchers, the navigators, and the storytellers whose names are lost but whose works endure, and finally a profound humility in the face of the vastness of what we do not and cannot ever know. We began this journey with an ancient record written in clay. We end with a question, not for the past but for ourselves. In the end, we are left with a single trace, a footprint, pressed into the wet earth of a lakeside shore 23,000 years ago. It is not a city. It is not a monument. It is only a moment, the weight of a human body passing through its world, a moment that refused to disappear. We have spent this time together following the echoes of the past, counting what was durable enough to survive the long silence. But the final question of this investigation is not about them.